Let's skip all the work and we're there. We're at your system. There are no prisons and there are no cops. Who does somebody call if they were? What happens?
We can definitely, like with very little brain work, imagine a system that's better than that system that you're describing, right?
Okay, so let me hear that.
Like we actually like have consent training in schools. We teach men to respect the boundaries of women.
No, we're talking about addressing crime. In your improved system where we brought those rates down a lot, there's dudes out there, they're rocking with consent. You still got a few people that are doing that sexual violence. What kind of remedy can we provide for victims of sexual violence?
I think, of course, having more like victim, therapy session, like
no.
Offering victim services would be a huge part of that. Of course. Can you actually justify how locking a person in a cage prevents from happening? Because that seems to be like the solution that you're offering here, right?
You're asking me if removing someone from society, physically removing them from society, will prevent them from sexually assaulting someone in that society?
All right, let's do it then. So Hutch, give my chat a little introduction. Are you who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, I got into internet stuff in 2009. I was kind of a big gamer back then, sort of rode a wave of popularity for Modern Warfare 2. But before that, I got interested in politics like years before that when I was in college. And my introduction to politics was just very heavily leftist. So like a lot of Chomsky and Zinn back in the day, majored in sociology. And the Trump era kind of began and I veered into like politics more and more. But there was like a combination of like politics and games for a few years.
Okay.
And then in recent last 2 or 3 years, I've been more heavily focused on politics. But you're not just into politics, you're into filmmaking, correct?
Hey, here's the thing. I don't really view them separately. I think I got into filmmaking so that I could, see the so that I could control, narratives and make propaganda basically.
Can I ask you what got you interested in
my radicalization and my worldview and stuff? So
yeah, what got you interested in films?
You just being a blockbuster kid, going and watching movies all the time. How growing up, so basically I moved to Chicago in 2011 and Occupy happened. And so that was really my radicalization moment was Occupy.
Interesting. How old are you?
32.
Okay. I got some years on you. I'm 41. But I remember, okay, cool. So I had just sort of started to get big on the internet around 2011 and I was in LA at the time. So I was very heavily, I was paying a lot of attention to Occupy. I went to one of the events and yeah, but yeah,
perfect movement in any means, but we build, every movement builds on the last one. You know what I mean?
So do you
people learned? I think that a lot of people were radicalized from that.
Do you have college education or yeah?
Yeah, I got a film degree. It was more like trade school, cinematography training.
Okay.
Trade skills.
Well, cool, man. So I do, yeah. I don't want to tell you where, but probably close to you.
No, it's okay. Actually, I left LA. I live in Kansas City now.
Oh, nice. How's it over there?
Yeah. Dude, it's great. There's a lot going on. I think honestly, the organizing, political organizing going on in Kansas City is more advanced than LA in some ways.
Interesting. How so?
Kansas City Tenants Union is one of the most powerful tenants unions in the nation. They're a leader. They go and knock on doors in apartment buildings, build tenant unions, lead rent strikes, fight against slumlords, stuff like that.
Nice. So do you recall what the initial disagreement you and I had was?
Yeah, I think it was originally a conversation about, oh yeah, you were using the genocide. You were talking about the genocide in Palestine, and you were kind of throwing it in the face of the left, saying that it's our fault that this is happening because Kamala Harris would be obviously better than Donald Trump. And it's somehow our fault that Kamala Harris lost.
Interesting. I recall it a little differently, but I think
tweet. But what parts of those? What part of that do you think is a mischaracterization, and what part do you think is fair to how you believe?
I don't think
I don't want to. I don't want to make any assumptions about what either. You know what I mean?
That's fine.
You or I believe. Like if you want to know what I think about something, just ask. I'm right here. That's the point of talking, right?
Yeah. So like I would not. This election was so it was close in the margins in terms of the popular vote, but it was pretty much a electoral college blowout. And the margins that he won in those swing states were bigger than the margins that Biden won with in 2020 and Trump won in 2016. So when the margins were as close as 2016 to 2020, then I think you get to point the finger at any one individual thing, even if it's a confluence of reasons why a candidate loses. And I think there were many reasons why Hillary Clinton lost. You can single out certain things and say, well, maybe if people took elections a little bit more seriously, then that would have made a difference. I'm not sure you can make that argument in the case of Trump winning in 2024. Just seems like there was a pretty broad rightward shift in the country. However, I do find myself a bit frustrated with like the left. How would you self-ID, by the way? I don't want to label you with something that you...
I mean, my name is Sin of Marxism.
Like, safe to say Marxist, right? Like that would be a nice little... Yeah, so like, I have to say that my frustration with that particular crowd, I think, has been mounting for like several years. I would say like shortly after Trump won in 2016 and was inaugurated, my initial intentions with politics was to build bridges with people that were maybe to my left. And again, at that time, I would say like pretty decently far left, ideologically. And what I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll throw it over to you in a second. But what I observed in the Trump era was a left that had become like increasingly hostile towards liberals that I think they would do well to form a coalition with to stop this like ascension of what I would call fascism in this country. So that's my take on that.
Do you think it's fascism? Do you think like right now it's fascism?
I think we're possibly in the beginning stages of something that could become like much, much worse. So as bad as things are right now, I think the potential is there. So like
definitely get worse. It can definitely get worse.
Well, that's that's interesting.
All of that, I think like there's a lot of places to push back there, and I think like, like Democratic lawmakers, I think play a very narrow. They're walking a narrow tightrope, right? Because at the end of the day, they are beholden to their donors. There's a financial incentive and a material like interest that they are not going to do things that benefit the working class, and they are beholden to that. So they're playing against the Republicans, which are out front for the capitalist class, but the Democrats are still going to do what the capitalists want, but there's like they just have to couch it in this like more liberal presentation, right? And so I rather than blaming voters, I think we should blame like the politicians. We should blame the story that is being told to voters that fails to explain the conditions of those voters in a meaningful way that Trump was able to take advantage of. Like there's the Trump story that is told to voters is your lives are not getting better, the economy is not getting better because there are X out group, because of trans people, because of undocumented people. And I feel like Kamala, and to another extent also like Hillary, this like mostly liberal and Biden in the same way, like they, rather than leading and presenting another story, which is that there is a group of people that is responsible for the lack of like advancement for the working class in this country. It's the capitalist class, but they're unable to say that. They're unable to like make that argument because they are also reliant and of the capitalist class.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's very, very little room for the Democrats that even need to exist. They're always going to be chasing the popular, like tailing the popular sentiments and not actually leading on anything.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot to unpack there. Like when you say you're a Marxist, so like Hassan, for example, I think he avoids using the label communist, but he wouldn't complain if it happened. So it seems like his perspective is like, he believes that would be sort of like a correct way to structure society, but he maybe doesn't necessarily think it's going to happen in his lifetime. Do you have aspirational goals of a Marxist revolution in your lifetime? What is your political project defined by? Are you trying to get closer to that? Or are you trying to like do that in your life?
Yeah, I would say in general the answer is yes, but I also like don't think there's like a whole lot of like value in doing that, because this is like a long-term process. I think there are things we can do like right now, and this is definitely something I would love to talk more about with you. Is like, what is the plan for like the future? You know, as we see every day a step further into fascism, every single day more and more precedents and institutions that are meant to stop this from happening are failing to stop anything from happening. And as it becomes clear and clear that voting might not be a way that we can get out of this, I think we have to talk about what that actually means. But I don't think it's like something where there's much. I don't honestly, personally, don't think there's much value in like me sitting here and like explaining or telling you the castle in the sky of details of what the society that I would like personally want to have, because I am like a democratic centralist at the end of the day, and it's gonna like have to be discussed amongst like literally millions of people, But I would like those people to actually have a stake in what they're building, and I feel like right now with the political environment that we're in, especially in electoralism, most people are not even getting any leadership that questions the direction of capitalism or questions who controls the power in our society.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know how much value there would be in us like going into great detail about the specific granular details of how you think society should be structured in your ideal situation. But I want to key in on something that you said. I watched one of your videos recently where you were talking about AOC and Bernie, and you were expressing you were expressing frustration with them because you felt like they weren't adequately pushing the movement forward in any kind of meaningful way. And you had expressed the idea that they should initiate what you called a clean break from the party. So essentially create a new political party. And there were
this is like super hypothetical, and obviously I don't think is realistic. I think Bernie has made it very clear that they are not going to do this. It's disappointing. But I definitely think that the Democratic name at one point may have been valuable to try to like, interest, like do an interest politics and try to like co-opt and change the dynamics of class advocacy within the party. Maybe that was at one point a good strategy. I think at this point, as a brand, it's actually like actively harmful to leadership, and they like will never allow people like AOC or Bernie to have any control. Like we have multiple examples of Bernie being like absolutely f***ed in primary seasons in like there's 10 years, I think like the idea that we can vote our way out of this, or that there's a path forward through the Democratic Party is no longer realistic.
Okay, so for example,
I think Bernie and AOC are uniquely positioned as the leaders of the quote unquote Democratic Party, as seen in a bunch of polls, to reach out, build a coalition of progressives within the Democratic Party and break and build a new party that is not a third party, but as actually exists to replace the Democratic Party.
Okay, so I think like we have found like the big, besides ideological differences, which I would say there are some differences there, some big differences, but like I would say that the big divide that you and I have right now, like philosophically, is, let me explain this to you by just like describing where I'm at politically in terms of what I think we should be doing right now.
I'd love to hear that.
So I mentioned the looming threat of fascism in this country, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. I don't think America is uniquely like immune to be susceptible to that kind of manipulation, demagoguery, propaganda, etc. Like, I don't think we're constitutionally different from any other culture that succumbed to fascism, whether it be like Cambodia or Italy or Germany or anything. And I think that if America succumbed to that kind of fascism, and of course there's like different shades, but I mean like to the point where Pol Pot, for example, killed a quarter of the population of Cambodia. Hitler obviously killed 6 million Jews, and if America succumb to that level, to that kind of fascism, to that degree of fascism, we're talking about a dystopian nightmare that I think would probably eclipse the Third Reich. Because if the Third Reich had American technology, 21st century technology, what do you think they would have done with that? And so that the stakes to me could not be higher. And so I agree. Like the Trump era, I would say, has radicalized me, but not into becoming like a leftist or anything, but it's radicalized me into taking electoral remedies seriously. And so there was a time where, like, for example, by the way, if I ever start to drone on or whatever, just let me know, but I'm just trying to flesh out my thoughts here.
Okay, keep going.
When Bush was reelected in 2004, it like devastated me, because this was a year into the Iraq war. It was kind of known at this point he had lied about WMD. I think Abu Ghraib, that prison that they discovered where we were torturing people, was exposed, and he still got reelected after that. That made me kind of check out of politics for a little bit. I honestly don't know if I voted in 2008. I might have, but I definitely didn't in 2012. And then starting in 2000,
can I ask? Since Obama, every presidential candidate that the DNC has put forward has voted for the Iraq War. Hillary and Biden both voted for the Iraq War. So, like, where did you? This was once a red line for you, and something changed. What happened?
Well, who do you think is more to blame for?
Of course, Bush. But I mean, they voted for it. They allowed it to happen as well.
So the Bush administration,
they supported it at the time. They were a part of that, like, propaganda. They consented, yeah.
Well, I believe Obama did not, right?
No. I said since. Okay, since
you said since Obama, right? Yeah.
Yeah, since Obama. Like the last 4 elections, right? 3 elections.
Yeah, in the sense of like who I would delegate blame to, I would obviously focus on the Bush administration, who cherry-picked raw intelligence to dishonestly create a narrative about WMD in that country. And then, and I don't know if like you remember the build up to the Iraq War. You must have been pretty young at that point, like 10 or 11. But it kind of morphed from like WMD into like spreading democracy and freeing people from the tyrant, Saddam Hussein. And so like, but in terms of the WMD justification, like them lying, not just to the American people, but to the Congress. So like, I think at worst you can say that people like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, who took the Bush administration at their word, were too gullible. But I wouldn't put them nearly as culpable for the Iraq War as I would the Bush administration. Like it wouldn't. That's
like Dick Cheney.
Yeah, Dick Cheney, obviously, yeah, right.
So when Kamala aligned with the Cheney family and brought them like throughout their entire campaign, that wasn't like a problem for you either?
Well, you say when they aligned with the Cheney family. Like what happened was Dick Cheney, I think, had said that he intended to vote for her, not because he liked her tax policy or, her politics, but because he thought that Donald Trump was a threat to democracy. She was asked that question, like, how do you feel about that? And on the fly, she answered, like, I'm honored to get his endorsement. I think at the time, I do a podcast with some friends. I think at the time I said, okay, that's a bit much. Like, I don't know if you have to say, like, I'm honored to get Dick Cheney's endorsement. But in the case of Liz Cheney, I think it's really obvious that Kamala was looking at the numbers and looking at what American voters were telling politicians at the time in 2024. And I think, like, would you agree that the country shifted somewhat to the right in the Biden era on a number of issues?
For sure.
Yeah. And so I think
that is like, there's a reason for it. And it's because there's no Democratic leadership. Like we come back to this idea of there is a story being told from the right wing There's the Republican Party has a very clear story that they're shaping the reality in American people's minds of the nation, and the Democratic Party does not have one. I think, for the most part, Kamala's campaign was actually gaslighting the American public, telling them that things were actually working really great when their lived reality was very different. And so they had these options of, do I believe this person telling me that things are good and I know in reality that it's hard for me to put food on the table, or do I believe the narrative that is, it's because of this this outgroup? So there was no counter to the argument of the outgroup. There was no counter to the story of the right wing. It was only, no. The immigrants are really bad. We're going to do something less inhumane than them, but mostly, mostly the same policies, right? Like,
when you say mostly the same policies, what do you mean?
Of the narrative that they're building, it wasn't this idea that, like, hey, it's actually like a noble thing for a family to like go through something to improve their own lives and like come here and to like and to contribute to our society. There should be pathways to amnesty. There's never any argument about this. Like, there's no story being told that actually explained immigration. There's I just feel like there's very, very little that the DNC actually has done to counter the lies. So yeah, the population followed their leadership, which I think is what happens typically with politics.
So I think there's some overlap here, because would you agree with the statement that Joe Biden was way better at policy than politics? Like, I heard you one time.
No.
You wouldn't agree with that? So I heard you describe Biden as having a pretty good track record on unions. I watched a few of your videos.
NLRB was strong. His NLRB was strong, but I think he also did some things that were like pretty, like okay with unions, but not like, as strong. Like the PRO Act was still stalled in the Senate for his entire run. He could have been pressuring the senators to pass the PRO Act. That would have actually made a very significant,
I mean, I have
on Americans' ability to unionize, but
I have a very different take when it comes to Biden during his time in office. Like, I don't think what I hear a lot from, and I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but what I hear a lot from leftists is they'll compare a president like Joe Biden to a president like Lyndon Baines Johnson and the various, hugely consequential pieces of legislation that he signed into law, from Medicare to civil rights to voting rights. They'll like to compare him to like FDR. But the obvious difference here is that they had enormous majorities to work with in Congress. I think each president, and this is just the way, as a function of the system, each president is constrained or empowered by the Congress that's elected alongside them. And so it's difficult for me to place expectations on Joe Biden to deliver like transformational healthcare reform. I just didn't go into his term with that expectation, because most people didn't even think we were going to get the Senate. And so the fact that we got that 50-50 Senate was just like, holy shit. And if you would have told me, for example, if you would have told me like 20 years ago that in 2020 we're going to elect a guy, and then that guy is going to do, regardless of whether or not you think it's enough, that's a separate conversation, but it's like, we can have that conversation. But like, if you would have told me that we were going to elect a guy that would codify gay marriage, that would pass the largest investment in climate that any country has ever done, that passed the most robust stimulus package in modern history, someone who is for sure the most pro-union president of my life, like by far, I would have thought, that's fair, that's accurate, but it's still true. And so if you would have told me all these things 20 years ago, so I'm looking at things in the context of the last like 40 years. So I understand people like your frustrations.
Another thing where it's like, I think a lot of like the disconnect between our ideologies are going to be the political of the possibility, right? Like what you think
definitely
is like possible, and like what is it within the realm of possibility of like the government doing?
Yeah, that's a huge
Yeah, it's going to be a gap, right? Like I think and I also like think there's limited uses for electoral politics in this way in general. Like, like I don't view our political engagement as strictly one thing you do every 4 years. And I think politics is a lot more than voting. You build power by like organizing. by like actually, you know, going out and working with each other and building like legitimate like power with organized people.
Sure.
And I think that's critically important right now in this moment.
I mean,
like,
it's
still like I still like would love to hear the plan for like what, you know, if we can't get out of Trump via voting, what is the responsibility for people? What should your audience be doing to fight against the rise in fascism?
Well, obviously we can get out of Trump with voting. That's what happened in 2020. And to be clear, it was a comfortable electoral college win, but the margins in the swing states were way closer than the other states. Like she lost by anywhere between like 1 to 3 points in these states. So when I think of a blowout, I think of like Reagan Mondale. He won 49 states. Like incredible, like it's just almost unthinkable at this point because things are so polarized.
Trump is like defying the Supreme Court though. Like there has been multiple Supreme Court rulings that have demanded his administration do very specific things and they're refusing to do those. We have no, like, there's no reason to believe that like we are, I think we're a lot closer. We are like a lot closer to fascism than maybe you're like willing to admit. I don't know if that's like a definitional, like,
that's why you're
not willing to cross or something.
That's why
like
your strategy confuses me though, because you seem to like the position that you took in the video was you were basically making somebody in you responded to someone in your chat in the video, and the guy said he brought up the concern about if you fracture the party, you're going to basically empower Republican political hegemony, perhaps for decades. And how you responded to the person in the video is you said things are already basically like it couldn't get any worse. It was sort of the sentiment that I inferred from what you said.
That I would push back. I think the point that I was making was that the Democratic Party is showing that they are hesitant and like actively resistant to actually doing any kind of reflection, to making any kind of change. Like if there was a moment after the 2024 election where the Democratic Party was like, it's 9/11 emergency, we're finding out anybody who knew that Joe Biden's brain was falling out of his ears, and we're exercising them from any political interaction. Like you know what I mean?
Is that
like,
what's happening now?
If there was any kind of movement towards a reckoning within the Democratic Party, then I might have some faith. But as it stands right now,
I feel like I
think that the Democratic Party will continue to slide, will continue to lose.
Really?
Like their approval ratings are like 30%.
Well, that's to be expected after, like, anytime a party loses an election, there's a period where they're pretty unpopular. Like, that's not abnormal. That's what happened in 2007.
They were popular before the election, though, too. Like, there's I think...
No, but I mean, I'm just saying...
Right now, there is a distrust with the Democratic Party, and there's like a stink on the brand that is so strong that I think we are dealing with a generational problem. And so, to me, the only solution to that is building outside of it, and building political power that would at one day replace the DNC.
So here's where I think we do have overlap, because I do think that the Democratic Party right now has an enormous brand problem. And a lot of that is on Biden himself. I think Biden, his decision to stay in the race, history will regard that as it will like really tarnish his legacy. And I know
we have institutional things around that allow that to happen too, though. I don't think you can just put that strictly on Biden. Like somebody should have grabbed the reins a long time ago. Whenever the stakes were as high as they were, like as much as you're angry at the left for like for Trump's like ascension, I understand that. I'm angry about Trump's ascension too, but I actually feel like there's the blame that is deserved to be placed should go to the DNC and the people who saw Biden for what he was and allowed us to skip a primary election. Didn't have any, like, we would have found out Biden wasn't capable in a debate, the first primary debate.
When you say skip a primary, you're implying as though there was a break from tradition in 2024 with respect to how we did the primaries. We did have a primary.
There should have been a break. There should have been a break from tradition. There should have been a call for the DNC to run against him. Like there should have been if he wants to run again, he needs to earn it. It wasn't a break from tradition. That's what I think what the problem was, and that's why we got Trump.
So both parties, this is just the way that we do politics in this country. So like both parties, there's a presumption whenever an incumbent runs for re-election that there's really not going to be that much of a challenge to that. The last time there was a break from, I mean, at least that's how it goes like in modern times. So for example, like when Trump ran for re-election in 2020, he didn't show up to his debates, and there was like Joe Walsh and another never Trump Republican, maybe Kasich, maybe was running. He didn't do debates because that's just not historically what they do. And there's a practical reason for that as well, because you don't want to waste money and resources and manpower, fighting primary challengers that you know are not going to win. What would be the point? Like, you want to save that war chest for the general. So I don't know, like when people say that, it implies that like 2020 was like we changed things up and he just didn't debate, but that's just how we do things. You say that, there could have been more institutional pressure on him to back out, and like hindsight's always 2020. That's for sure. It's not hindsight though. There were people who were with him and worked with him every day who knew how like his brain was deteriorating. Like there are people who knew that, and they're still working within the DNC. They're still like top level operatives that are getting asked, questions. Like I just don't know what disqualifying. I just don't know what in practice, like how many tools you really have to like, if an incumbent says like, I'm running, I think there was like more the institutional pressure to push him out of the race after the debate. There was just something to point to, some tangible thing, that disastrous debate that gave them this sort of like impetus and ammunition to actually exert that pressure. But before that debate, it was just, like if he stayed in, like, I don't want to necessarily strictly disagree with you. Like maybe there could have been more movement behind the scenes. It's like, we did have people challenge him. Dean Phillips was out there. Cenk was out there. Marianne Williams was out there. But I think most people in the Democratic Party apparatus were like not thrilled that he was staying in the race, but it's like, this is his choice. Like he's the guy, and we have primary contests, and most of the time he was getting like 80-90% of the primary votes, and that's the process. But like, I don't want to get bogged down on like, I agree with you that Joe Biden.
That's like that's a problem with the Democratic Party, and I haven't seen, and I haven't been convinced that anything has been changed within it that would give me confidence that party infrastructure that allowed that to happen is going to mount any kind of resistance to this fascist government that is totally has the press in his pocket, totally has the Supreme Court in his pocket. Like he has the Senate. He has like who's going to stop him?
Well, what happened in 2000? What happened in 2018? I mean, I assume you were probably saying something very similar in 2017. That you had no faith in the Democratic Party. That I don't want to like. I'm not being malicious or whatever, but like, were you saying something similar in 2017 about the Democratic Party?
I moved to Vietnam in 2016. I was pretty checked out of American politics.
That's fair. Did you do that because of the election?
It was a part of it. It was like a lot of different things,
Okay. How was that?
That was the best decision I made. I lived there for 3 years. It was incredible.
Awesome. But I suspect a lot of people, and now, in fact, I remember a lot of people were, after the Democrats lost in 2017, that was a worse loss, by the way. So like, Trump won, and he had like a 45 seat majority in the House and like a 3-seat majority in the Senate. And so like, that was an actual kind of red wave. And there was a lot of conversations about the Democratic Party, like Dems in disarray. Are they ever going to recover from this? But I'm telling you, as someone who like, this discourse happens every time a party sustains a big loss. There's always like this, like overblown, is this the end of the party? And that's been happening for decades. And so like, I share a lot of the same criticisms that you have.
I think it's kind of wild that you're acting like this is not an exceptional moment.
Exceptional how? What do you mean? I think I'm saying that I agree with you about like your concerns about. I think I agree.
A congressperson for a Democratic congressperson was charged with a felony like today.
Right.
What do you mean? People are being disappeared and sent to like CCOT. Like what? How? We live. This is a different political reality. Than Trump won was. This is a different political reality than we have ever lived in America.
I'm not sure what you think I think about that. I think those things are very bad. And I do want to see the Democratic Party like improve their campaign strategy, their messaging. They for sure need to engage in alternative media spaces. They totally ceded all that territory to Republicans for years. So I'm sure we agree about like, maybe we disagree about like the extent of things, but I'm sure there's a lot of overlap in terms of the various critiques that you can make of the Democratic Party. I'm simply saying that, you know, people were saying very similar things in 2017 in terms of the future of the party. And what happened? Donald Trump went after healthcare. He ultimately failed. And Democrats ran not so much on like Trump, he's a fascist in 2018. They ran on like, we're going to protect your healthcare. And it worked. That was an actual blue wave election. Like we won the House in convincing fashion, won a Democratic trifecta in 2020. And so I have obvious concerns about the state of the country, and I want a competent party to be able to take on this president. But your solution I find completely baffling, because it seems as though it's like, you're saying that you acknowledge that Donald Trump is escalating now. Like, I agree with you. Like the fact that he's like taking people to CCOT and revoking people's student visas for being pro-Palestinian, even vaguely pro-Palestinian, is certainly an escalation. It's not like he wasn't doing like horribly inhumane stuff in 2017 and 18 either. Like the family separation policy was one of the most barbaric things this government's ever done. It's like one of the worst things you can imagine is kidnapping a child. But you seem to be of the opinion, you seem to like, you acknowledge that a clean break with Bernie and AOC would fracture the Democratic Party. It would weaken the Democratic Party so much that it would ensure Republicans like not just have majorities, but enough majorities to pass constitutional amendments. I don't understand that. That doesn't make like the idea that like, oh, things are getting really bad, so therefore here, let's take an action that like would empower Donald Trump to pass a constitutional amendment like banning porn or certain political speech, or this idea that we should just, or this idea that I'll finish up, but like this idea that we should just let them pack the judiciary. So like it's cool that you want to do a new party and everything like that, but
the judiciary.
You can't imagine.
I've already done this.
But like,
what are we talking about?
This is what confuses me about the way that you speak about these things. Is you are painting this picture as though we are already like maximally fucked. Everything is so irrevocably fucked that we have no choice but to do a clean break. And I think that that's very myopic thinking, because I think things can get much worse. I think the fact that there's a 3-seat majority in the House and a 3-seat majority in the Senate kind of sucks, because they're going to be able to pass reconciliation bills. If you give Republicans super majorities so they can pass constitutional amendments, or give them the ability to continuously appoint judges for the next like 10 years without any kind of like Democratic administration coming in and evening those numbers in the federal judiciary, you can't imagine things getting much, much worse.
I think things are going to get much, much worse. And I think the institutions that you claim that are going to like save us from fascism, and like the idea that they need constitutional amendments in order to do the things that they want to do, like the constitutional amendments only matter because of the Supreme Court, which they are openly defying already. These institutions are failing right now. And like they're not saving us. I don't think that that's going to happen. I think the actual, and also I think that this idea is very like, it's very typical of liberals in general, where it's like we're always on the defense of what, well, of course it can get worse, and because we're always on the defense, there's never any offense. And I think breaking from the Democrats, identifying the Democratic Party as a part of the oligarchy, if that's the term that we want to use, as tied to capitalist interests in a way that will not ever benefit the working class, being able to make that argument, calling on local organizations around the United States to band together, build a big tent, actually coalition build, to mount a legitimate resistance that the Democrats we are here. They're not. There's no resistance from the Democrats. Like their choice is.
I'm not sure I know what that means though,
and not do anything.
I don't know what that means.
Like, it's been openly their choice, and then we get like.
Wait, come on. Can I just pause real quick on that? When you said there's no pushback whatsoever, what do you think blue states all over the country are doing in terms of the lawsuits that they're initiating? And it's true that the Trump administration has like in my mind flagrantly ignored a Supreme Court ruling with respect to the like renditions to Venezuela or whatever, but he has not ignored all of the rulings. You understand that, right? So like the courts are still like checking this administration like a lot. He is losing in court currently a lot. Like, who do you think is bringing about these lawsuits?
Is there like a red line in your head of like, if this happens, then it's like beyond the pale? Like there's, you know, like if this happens, then I need to change my tactics. Like, do you have that? Do you have like a
change my tactics to like the ANC, like, you know, violent sabotage, like violent resistance, revolution, that kind of a thing?
I mean, I don't think like individual action is really like the path for any like individual violent action like that. I don't think is a path to liberation, but I think like collectively building power.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Outside of democratic institutions, because these democratic institutions are not there to advocate for us, and they are not going to mount any like a meaningful resistance to the things that are coming.
This sounds kind of abstract to me. Like, can you be more specific about like what do you envision this resistance? What form does it take? Are we talking about electoral politics at this point, or are we talking about like an insurgent sort of rebellion?
I think there should be rapid response networks. I think like the Know Your Rights campaigns are effectively working at stopping deportations.
What,
you know, like teaching people how to look for a warrant, building rapid response networks that can act when ICE is in your neighborhood. Yeah, I think that's like the main, one of the main things I'm doing.
Like a posse, like a posse of hipsters that show up to like physically engage with ICE or whatever.
This is not even a new thing. This is immigration rights organizations have been fighting against deportations with rapid response networks for decades.
Are you talking about, no, but are you talking about affording them like legal counsel within the system, or are you talking about like violent resistance?
No, I'm talking about when ICE shows up to a door, there are people who are going on patrol, finding them, and then we can show up there, remind the people of their rights, and stop them from going in that door. And
but at that point, you're still engaging in the system itself. If we cede, like, I have a hard time. I really struggle with this idea that
this kind of collective power and training yourself. And
that doesn't sound like power to me.
It doesn't. Why is that?
It sounds like it sounds like a response to power. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like if we imagine, a world where they have 75 Senate seats and 150 seat majority in the House, and they're passing constitutional amendments and banning political speech and deporting people for or throwing them in internment camps, that is going to, I don't know if your rapid response team is going to be an adequate force against that.
What do you think would be an adequate force against that? I
would like to prevent that from happening in the first place.
I agree,
instead of hastening.
The Democratic Party is actively not preventing that from happening. The Democratic Party chose to run Joe Biden against the rise of fascism that Trump was presenting.
Did the Democratic Party choose to run Joe Biden, or did Joe Biden choose to run?
Oh my God, dude. Like, are you really going to argue that there wasn't institutional backing for Joe Biden running again? Like, there was people standing in his way at all in the Democratic Party?
As is the case for any incumbent. Like, typically, like when we're talking about incumbents.
The point is that the Democratic Party lost.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party failed to present a story that beat the story that the fascists were telling. And they're failing to mount any kind of like actual resistance that would stop the constant escalation, the constant defunding of critical services that the government does do good or does do well.
You understand, right? All that would happen orders of magnitude worse if we gave Republicans the kind of unchecked power that your clean break would create.
This threat of it getting worse, at some point that has to like how bad does it have to be for that threat to no longer matter, and to understand that we need to do something different? We need to try a different pathway.
I'm saying the solution that you're presenting to address that rise of fascism seems to directly empower these forces that are sliding towards fascism. Your solution empowers them to have even more institutional power, to
But
You
your
seem
solution is to continue down the path that gave them the power that they have. Like, I want to make sure.
well. We're
everybody
talking
is
about
really
electoral
clear that
politics.
your plan was tried. Your plan
I don't know what that
was
is.
given and was like you saw it operate. Kamala Harris ran the campaign that you supported the entire time.
Yeah, of course.
So it lost, and we have fascism now, and the Republicans are fully in control. So you're threatening us with something that is the result of the actions that you supported.
Well, now I want to double back because I asked you a few moments ago, because I said that you seem to be suggesting that we're already like maximally f***ed now, which I commented, I think that's myopic. I think you're lacking imagination I think you're lacking imagination if you think that things cannot get so much worse if we give them the kind of majorities that your plan would allow for. So like, if your plan is to just, and you tell me, I mean, I'm not going to like, it's a valid like thing to believe in, but do you believe that we should just like hasten the demise of the system itself? We should just speed up this process is going to.
I'm not an accelerationist. That's why I think we need to start today.
But I think in practice you are
the thing we need to start building an actual working class party that actually represents working class people and not billionaire interests. And that work needs to be started today.
Okay. I mean, like, all right, let's say
it needs to be started years ago. It needed to be started in 2016 when the DNC collaborated to keep Bernie off the ticket.
The DNC collaborated to keep Bernie off the ticket?
This is like well documented that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, like it was Hillary's seat, and we were everything in their power to make that happen.
I was just arguing with somebody about this for like 3 hours, like not that long ago. So it's like we're treading kind of the same ground from my chat here, but we have primary contests all over this country. Each state determines what kind of election system they want to run. You either have a primary contest or a caucus. And if you took away every single superdelegate in the country, Bernie Sanders still lost by millions of votes. This idea that he was entitled to the presidency or he was entitled
to it. I think people felt Hillary was entitled to it.
Yeah, that's why they voted for her in larger numbers. She got like 3.5 million more votes than he did. So I mean, and what he did was like really impressive. Like the way that he sort of brought like that kind of like progressive framework into the mainstream was something that really hadn't happened in a really long time. Not even Obama, I would say, like got people having the kind of conversations that probably like influenced your political trajectory, right? But like you talk about the failures of like the Democratic Party and how they just can't be relied on. I have to ask, like, if you're going to have all this smoke for the Democratic Party for losing an election to Donald Trump, I have to ask, like, well, how have you guys been doing in the last like 8 years? Because to me, it seems like you guys have. Yeah.
What do you want to talk about? The Bernie and AOC are leading the Democrat. Like in every poll, when asked who's the leader of the Democratic Party right now, they are the top. I
would have to look at
like. I mean, leftist candidates are winning in local elections. You can look at Kenneth Mejia in LA.
Well, it
currently has the most votes of any record citywide race of all time.
Do you feel like you're
more than the mayoral candidates?
Do you feel like
an explicitly anti-police defund platform?
Do you feel like democratic socialism is stronger now than it was in 2017? I would say it's worse.
It's an interesting question. In some ways, yes. Maybe in some ways, no.
I would say it's doing much worse. And when you look at the progressive candidates across this country and compare their races to more moderate candidates or blue dog Democrats, progressives did way worse than the moderate and blue dog Democrats in this country, which isn't an that's not an endorsement of blue dog Democrats, just stating a fact. So like, if you're going to rag on the Democratic Party for not having effective messaging, shouldn't you also do some reflection about like how you guys are trying to approach politics? Because it seems like you're turning a lot of people off.
Yeah. Turning people off?
Yes.
Like who?
Normies. You're turning normies off.
Turning off.
Do you believe that we should, when you say, okay, for example, like, do you believe when you say defund the police, you identify as an you identify as an abolitionist, right?
Uh-huh.
Can you tell me what that looks like in practice? I'm I want you to speak at length about this. Like, inform me.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So abolition is a long-term goal. It's not something, no abolitionist would tell you we should get rid of the police or prisons tomorrow. But it stems from a recognition that policing does not prevent crime. Policing is a reaction that addresses what happens after harm has been done. It does nothing to prevent crime from happening or address the actual reasons why people commit crime. And that by restructuring of society and mostly a function and an examination of the way that city budgets have been structured in our cities by Democratic mayors and Democratic city council members all the way through a lot of times, policing and spending on police has absolutely gutted the rest of the city budget. You have multiple cities across America that are like in financial ruin right now because of police payouts, because they can't hold their officers accountable, because their hands are absolutely tied by Democratic mayors going into contract negotiations with police unions, and totally, just absolutely signing away the entire city budget.
So, but you're right.
Because of that, we don't have the resources to, build affordable housing, to
you think
or social housing. We don't have any resources to feed people. We've allowed people to fall into extreme poverty in ways that increase crime rates. And I would like there to be a society that focused more on addressing people before they were to commit a crime, giving people off ramps if they're going down paths that would lead to harm.
But you're never right.
Solutions to these things before the harm happens rather than after. Because currently the solution we have is that police show up after a crime has happened, oftentimes hours later. They solve about 2% of major crime. They don't do anything to restore justice to the victim. If they catch somebody, they lock them in a cage. And so it's gotten to the point where we now have 2 million people in cages, 2 million U.S. citizens in cages, a quarter of which are not even convicted of a crime. They're pre-trial detention,
right? Strictly
held in prison because they can't afford to pay bail.
But your long-term goal eventually would be a system that didn't have any kind of incarceration system or law enforcement whatsoever, right?
That's right. Yeah,
sorry.
Right.
Okay. So you asked me a moment ago how you guys are turning off like normies.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm talking about. So whatever system you can devise that would attack the socioeconomic root problems that drive a lot of people to commit crimes to begin with. However you address that, you're never going to do it perfectly. And so there's always going to be some kind of crime. And so under your system, your final, let's say let's skip all the work and we're there. We're at your system. There are no prisons and there are no cops. Who does somebody call if they were raped? What happens?
Wait, what do you think that happens if somebody gets raped now?
You call the police and you file a police report. And if they can compile enough evidence, you convict someone.
Have you ever spoken with a victim about how that interaction goes for them?
I've witnessed that whole process firsthand. I had an ex-girlfriend. We went through the whole thing. It was a nightmare. If you don't want to,
I'm sorry that happened. But
if you don't want to do,
we have now is really bad, and we can definitely, with very little brain work, imagine a system that's better than that system that you're describing, right?
Okay, so let me hear that.
I mean, what do you we actually have consent training in schools. We teach men to respect the boundaries of women.
No, we're talking about addressing crime. I'm not talking about profile.
That addresses the crime. What do you mean? We have no investment in this right now. I understand that this is going to be a long-term thing. Like I said, this is a generational problem.
Do you think that we can entirely
violence? Not something that we can just snap out of existence. This is a deep societal problem.
Do you think that we can entirely eliminate sexual violence through education about concepts like consent? Do you think we can get that number down to zero?
No, probably not entirely, but I think we could do a lot better than we're doing now. All right,
so in the cases, in your improved system where we brought those rates down a lot, there's dudes out there, they're rocking with consent, you still got a few people that are doing that violence. what kind of remedy can we provide for victims of sexual violence?
I think, of course, having more like victim, therapy session, like
No.
offering victim services would be a huge part of that, of course.
Let's say there was a sexual assault and it's caught on camera, right?
Hold
So
on. Instead of this, can you actually justify how locking a person in a cage prevents from happening? Because that seems to be like the solution that you're offering here, right?
you're asking me if removing someone from society, physically removing them from society, will prevent them from sexually assaulting someone in that society if they're physically not like there. So it's like,
so you think that the reason that people like commit rape is just because there's like something different with them, and the only solution is to remove them from society?
I think that people expect a level of protection from the government that represents them. They at the national level. Hold on. At the national level, you got to let me
currently prevent from happening.
You can't prevent rape from happening. I'm talking about. I mean, like we're talking about. You're talking about like to the extent that we can
stop rape from happening. We're
not talking about a minority report system where you have precogs that can like perfectly predict crime. But in any society, even if you address everyone's material needs, you're still going to have some percentage of the population that exhibit antisocial personality traits that will engage in crimes, that will incur victims. And in your proposed society, the victims don't have any recourse. This is a concept that I think and I think the numbers bear that out. The idea of like getting rid of prisons is I would assume in single digits, like in terms of approval. And so when you focus on these kinds of like policy goals,
Hutch, this is important. Do you think that we should just enact, like the party should just enact policy based on what is popular? Like, do you think that's how we should be taking our political notes on what we believe to be right and wrong?
You're asking about like, do you think that
we should be tailing the population, or should we be leading the population?
Well, that's sort of a function of democracy. So like in a democracy, and I know it's not a perfect democracy, but we do live in a democracy. This is like, I don't want to split hairs about that. But in a democracy, if you have a majority of people that are asking for a certain thing, then if you want to keep your job as that politician, you probably want to take action on that thing. But like, I think you're getting at something different, which is that I think you're saying that the Democratic Party needs to be in the leadership position on these issues. Like you want the Democratic Party to be out there delivering a convincing message so we can change people's minds about like immigrants. And so like I personally think we should have really loose borders. I'm sure you agree with me, or maybe you don't want any borders whatsoever or whatever. But like, I think that it does require someone to not just one person. It would have to be like a team effort. You have to like have a lot of people out there delivering effective messaging. And I totally agree with you, by the way, that the Democratic Party in the last like 4 years have done a really poor job of being in a leadership position on these issues. However, I'm just saying the general population has shifted right on a number of issues. And so it stands to reason that you would expect that the Democratic Party itself would shift right. And I don't see any evidence that we would have won the election if Kamala ran on prison abolition. Do you believe?
Yeah, of course not.
Right.
Of course not. But that's not what I'm asking. I'm not saying that Kamala should have ran on prison abolition. Like that's ridiculous. The point is that around 2020 specifically, right? You had like, the entire nation was debating abolition, was having these conversations.
No, they weren't. No, they weren't.
Okay, well,
that was a hyper online niche leftist space that was debating prison abolition.
I don't think that's
everybody else was looking at that and saying, what the fuck is going on? We're like, why are we talking about prison abolition? You think that prison abolition was
all right, Hutch. How much?
Sorry. I'm interrupting too much.
Do you think we should just be continually like increasing, like, is there amount of like police funding that you think is like a good amount? You know what I mean? Like, because and I come back to this too, because look at like if you look at polling, I can pull up the poll if you want to see it, but there's a very interesting polling around that time where if you looked at the polling of defund the police, right, it would be like 20% in favor, 80% against. However, in that exact same poll with those exact same people, if you ask them what are your thoughts on reallocating police funding to social services that actually address the root causes of crime, it would be like 48%, 49%.
Yeah, but that's not prison abolition. When we're talking about diverting some of those funds to social services who might...
Nobody is, once again, no abolitionist. Abolition is like a theoretical mind frame, right? When we're talking about abolition and how it would enact in like a city government right now, it's like it's step by step.
Yeah,
and it starts by redirecting funds from police and prisons into more social services, more education, things like the consent trainings in schools. Like these kind of things that actually would prevent crime, and gradually creating the world in which people's needs are taken care of, and there's less reasons for people to cause harm to each other.
I'm glad you brought this up because like what you're talking about, I think most people would be open to that kind of a thing. When we talk about if we want to define,
sorry to interrupt you one more time, but this brings me back to the thing. Sure. So you had around 2020, the defund the police was a massive slogan, and you had every media apparatus slandering this slogan through the movement, and like the media generated this buzz, especially in 2021 around this huge crime wave, which of course was like brought back. Crime actually didn't go up. Like there was like all of these different narratives about
it went up a little bit starting in 2021,
and like and all of it was entirely manufactured by.
There was some crime increases, but they weren't
justify increased pricing.
There were some crime increases. There were some property crime increases. There were some violent crime increases, but the level of increase was massively overblown. But I'm glad you brought up like
that was the leadership that the voters were getting. And
okay,
the Democratic Party, instead of talking about what would be effective governing policy for our cities, they adopted this framing of crime is bad.
Let me jump in and
leading on that on a 49% to 51% policy that they could have actually probably changed and made our cities better, have more money for public transit, for things that actually benefit people. Instead of doing that, they defaulted into the capitalist class's narrative, which is that there's a crime wave and we need more police.
Okay,
right.
So I'm glad you brought up the issue, the contention around the phrase itself, because I recall a conversation that I had with a friend of mine. He's in progressive media space. I won't say his name, but we got into it like a little back and forth on Twitter because I was saying this phrase is bad, and even if people are taking it out of context and assigning or maliciously misrepresenting what people meant by defund the police, we shouldn't make it easy for them. We should go with a different phrase. And I had this debate with one of my friends, and he was of the mind that no, we should not change this slogan. And I asked the person I was having a conversation with, if you knew it would get actual results, if you knew that changing the phrase would actually lead to these, there was a pilot program, I think in Denver, where they did this very thing. They diverted funding away from the police department. It went towards social services who would show up for like nonviolent stuff, like people having psychotic breaks or drug related stuff. And the program was wildly successful. So we have like a model of this program working. But if the phrase itself, which is kind of vague and can be interpreted different,
what the phrase would be if people
no. But I don't. This blows my mind because the phrase itself could be interpreted to mean something that maybe you didn't want it to mean. And so why make that job easier? Why not go with reform police?
Like, who do you think that I like made the slogan or something? Like, this was a slogan that was developed with like thousands of people in the street in the middle of a pandemic.
And it was really bad slogan. That's what I'm saying. It was really bad.
Okay.
I think we could have actually done a lot of these pilot programs. I think we could have actually made a lot of progress there.
What's bad about it though?
It's vague.
Also, like, when you say it's bad, because if it's so bad, like the Republicans were so quick to like adopt that exact same rhetoric and start saying like defund the FBI, defund the IRS. Like if it's such a bad slogan, I wonder why like they were so happy to adopt it themselves.
It's vague because when people say, people don't know if you mean get rid of police or divert funds. They just don't know. It's like, I don't know what that meant. Defund the police. Did you know that the phrase defund the police was less popular in major police? Did you know that the phrase defund the police and the very concept of defunding the police is less popular in heavily black areas? Less popular. It is
Okay.
like, it is a myth that like black, even at the height of BLM stuff in 2020.
Again, I also like, I don't understand why you're bringing this. What are you arguing that like police budgets should stay large? Like you want them to be defunded, right?
I want what you want in terms. Well, I don't know what you said. You wanted abolition as your final goal, so we do not agree there. But I do agree.
Maybe we can start on the same path, and the first few steps we can agree on, right?
Yeah, in terms of shifting some of that police budget to social services who can respond to like. We've all seen too many clips of like an autistic person or schizophrenic person having an episode and then a cop shoots them. Like these are the exact scenarios that would greatly benefit from this type of program. And of course I support that. And because I support that, I think next time we should go with fucking reform the police or something different because defund was too vague.
No, we should not go with reform the police. The police have been reformed from the moment that they were created. They've been trying to professionalize.
We're talking about police reforms.
Reform the police into something new. This is why we say abolition, because we don't want police reform. Police reform equals higher police budgets, less funding for the services that we actually need. Like every single time. That's exactly how George Floyd, that's how the 2020, that's how these reforms ended up manifesting, was they slapped George Floyd's name on a bill and they funneled billions of dollars into local police like budgets.
Most people
further exacerbating the problems that are causing our cities to be the way they are.
The uncomfortable reality of the situation is that most people support increases to police budgets. That's just a reality.
Dude, again, like, is this how you develop your ideology? I'm trying to ask.
No, but I think I think every political party needs to navigate the
just follow whatever the
I'm not saying listen no listen to me.
In a moment where Elon Musk is like actively using one of the largest like platforms to radicalize people towards like extremely far right candidates all around the world, right?
Okay.
So if the answer from the liberals is just to like, you know, to be very, very attentive to the demands of the fascist population, while the fascist media tells them fascist stories.
That's not what I'm saying.
Leadership, there's no countering of these narratives.
That's not what I'm saying.
We're in a really bad spot.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that political parties should just blow completely with the winds and not take any kind of like, not have any principled positions or anything. But I'm simply saying you cannot just ignore these things. And so if you have a situation where, have you looked up polling for defund the police recently?
Yeah, I understand that I understand. Yeah.
It's really bad. It's like single digits bad.
Sure.
So this idea that
there was like I said, there was like literally like a 2 or 3 year media absolute and hard focus on crime waves happening that was totally overblown.
There were some increases in crime across the country. That's not a myth. It happened. It's not to the level, obviously the Republican Party were in all over the country. All over the country, there were increases in property crime.
All over the country, crime
Yes. Yes. Marginally. Just look at the FBI crime statistics. I don't know what to should I give you a link? Like, I'm not making this up. We're not talking about like a 500% increase or a 600% increase, but there was a slight increase in crime. And you would sort of expect that to happen in the aftermath of a pandemic that created economic hardship. Would you not? Like, does it not logically follow that if people's economic circumstances have become strained, that you would probably see a slight increase in crime? But the fact of the matter is, like, most people generally broadly support like funding police officers. You asked like how my opinion doesn't really matter. Like, it is what it is.
Wait,
like,
your opinion not matter? Why would I give a fuck about the polls? Like,
is it a good thing that people
determine morality? Popularity does not determine what is like a just policy that would benefit the most people.
Is it a good thing that people like generally want more funding from police? I think it's probably a natural thing. I think people want to.
There's like explainable reasons that we can say. Like, you watch your local news any night, and there's going to be every single night a steady stream of news stories that are literally designed to make you feel unsafe. Like, bro, like the soy right is so terrified of American cities. You live in LA. Yep. Is it as scary as like people portray it to be online?
No. I mean, there's some neighborhoods where I probably wouldn't walk around, but for the most part, I've never felt nervous walking around.
Okay, so like, yeah, like this, they manufacture consent for policing, and there's a very vast media
Well, I mean,
apparatus
just feel like
that exists in order to do this. And I think that the Democratic Party and whatever party would replace them, I think any politician that is interested in actually doing things that would make our cities better should advocate for a reduction of this funding. Like you should take on the police and take on these narratives in a very direct way. And I think in general, the Democratic Party, they tail the voters exactly as you're doing, falling back on these like prevailing narratives instead of leading and giving people a vision of a future that is different than the one we live in.
You asked me how I thought you guys were turning people off from your political movement. This is just one of those examples, and I think the numbers just back it up 1000%. The thing that you're proposing here is just not necessarily the idea of like diverting funds away, but your end goal of abolition, police abolition and prison abolition. These things are, I do not share your optimism that you could, through sufficient educational efforts, like change people's minds about this. I don't think you're ever gonna.
We'll always have to lock some bad people in cages.
Yeah, of course. Yes. We're talking about like, I'm talking about like violent criminals. Yes, there are some things that you're not going to be able to.
They're born violent and born criminals, and they need to be locked in a cage.
No, I'm not saying that. I don't think that I believe in redemption. I believe in reform. I think we can make our prison system better. I like the Nordic system of having a much more humane prison structure. I think is like something to model. I would love to see that. That's probably not very popular right now, but I would love to see that in the future. But you're never going to get rid of violent crime altogether. And as long as there is violent, there are going to be people there that have antisocial personality stuff, that are more prone to violence, that are more prone to abusing their partners, that are more prone to like assaulting people or stealing or pulling a knife on people. This happens. You can't.
There's one group that's a lot more prone to abusing their partners.
You're gonna say cops?
Yep.
I don't know. I feel like that was like massively overblown. Are you talking about the 52% of cops thing or whatever?
40.
Is that an actual thing though? Because I feel like I looked into it and I don't know if it was. There, he's referencing there's like some statistic that they say that 40% of cops have engaged in domestic violence, but I don't know where that study came from. And I don't.
You can imagine though, if your job is to like, enact violence as a solution to like very minor like disagreements, that you might bring that home, right?
My dad was a cop. So I'm not going to get in details about like my childhood, but
yikes.
It presented some difficulties at various times. But that doesn't mean that I think we should like get rid of the only mechanism that we have to like give people recourse if they are the victim of a crime. I don't think we can fix violent crime altogether just by education. That seems that seems very, very lofty goal to me.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I think I would rather not focus on like the places that we disagree on that, and I would love for if like if you believe that we should like address our police funding and like city budget crises that are happening around America. There's like we really should be defunding the police.
But I would love to form a coalition with you. I would love to figure out where we can overlap and establish a voting block where we work together to make sure that Republicans don't win. You don't want that. You think I'm like you. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like,
I mean, I've been. I don't know what you mean. Like I lived in LA. I voted. I would have knocked on your door. Like I worked on campaigns. You know what I mean? Like I don't. In what way am I being the person in charge of this? If you are seen as like the one who's angry at leftists. Like
I am.
Like
I'm very frustrated with you guys because I want you to help me. I want you to help me stop these people.
But we're not. I don't think we have the same goal. You want to continue to invest in like a bourgeois, like capitalist party, and I don't think that's going to prevent fascism from happening. In fact, I think it's facilitating it happening.
Ideologically, we do not agree. So I'm not like strictly anti-capitalist. I'm much more of like a Sweden Democrat or whatever. And so like we're never going to agree on that. But I'm sure we do agree that there are ways that we can improve material conditions for low income earners in this country, middle income earners in this country, I think the fact that we have people suffering from the toxic stress of maybe not want to go to the hospital because they can't afford the treatments, that is a choice that the richest country in the world is making that I think is completely unacceptable. So I think we could
70,000 people die every year from lack of healthcare in America.
So that's something that we can agree on. And I feel like, you know, like, I'm not going to tell you, like, I'm going to work with you to dismantle capitalism, but I would love to work with you to elect more politicians and accumulate more political power as a coalition, and then work towards goals that I think are achievable. Like, I would love to do that with you.
So would you agree with the statement that, like, capitalism generally like encourages the, like, concentration of money and power in the hands of, like, a very few?
Unfettered capitalism, yeah. I mean, but you can have a government institute safeguards and robust welfare state policies, such as the Nordic states, where we can increase the bottom standard of living to a degree where people can escape that toxic stress of poverty. But I don't share your view that we need to end capitalism altogether, and I don't share your view that Marxism is workable. I don't think it is.
Why is that?
I don't think that Marxism is as efficient at progress. I don't think that I think Marxism, listen, I don't want to, like, stray too much into this, because I'm sure you can get more esoteric with it, and, like, the economic stuff is not something that I can have, like, a conversation and kind of bullshit my way through it, but I don't want to pretend like I'm an expert. But I just, let me just say one thing. If for no other reason, I don't see an appetite for Marxism in America. I don't think that most people want to get rid of.
We're back to you just don't have, like, I don't know. We're back to the same concept of, like, you know, well, it's not the way that it is, and so therefore it never will be.
I don't think that there's ever going to be, never say never, right? But, like, right now, I don't think most people want to get rid of capitalism. I think they want to increase their buying power. I think they want to be able to buy a house. I think they want to be able to, you know, be in the, you know, 80th percentile or whatever for, like, income, or lower percentiles, but still be able to, like, take a vacation, put their kid through college, buy a home, buy a car.
I think a lot of people would really like to, like, have more ownership over their workplaces, which is really all that Marxism is at the end of the day, you know. How do you think you have this, like, capitalist class that generates revenue simply by owning a factory and doing the labor there, that the people who, you know, make that value, create that value, are the ones who control what happens to that value, and you know, how much each of them get paid, and it's a more democratic workplace. Like, that's really all it is.
How do you think, like, because we spent a lot of time talking about the Democratic Party's failures to convince voters that they should be in the driver's seat of the country. How do you think Marxists have been doing, like, lately, in terms of convincing people that capitalism should be discarded and replaced?
I mean, I think there's some ways in which it's been going well. I think you look at, like, there's, you know, like, the increase of union membership around the country, the Amazon labor union. Yeah, I think people are seeing the contradictions in capital a lot better than ever before. However, I do think there's, like, still a big barrier to, like, popular adoption, which is, like, just like media, you know. There's very little ideological diversity that thinks or shows people what that even identifies what capitalism is, you know, or like points. I don't think, like, most people could give you any kind of, like, class analysis. There's very little class consciousness, or, like, an awareness that there is, like, this, like, inherent imbalance in social power.
What's your plan to address this propaganda effort against your movement, and how do you think you guys have been doing in the last 10 years?
I think it's a cumulative struggle. I think, you know, you take moments as they come, right? So I think, like, things like the encampment movement in America. Like, you know, there's a lot of like internal and personal like change that's happening in the activists that participated in that. I think the same thing would be true of like Occupy, of Black Lives Matter. You know, these contradictions in capital, I think, especially now, especially under Trump, are going to get stronger and stronger. And I do think there will be moments where, you know, people it boils over a little bit. And I think in those moments, like, people's political understanding and the way that they're you know, that they view themselves in the world can change very, very rapidly. Things can happen like very quickly, and this is like how revolutions happen always.
Would you agree that even if you think the differences are marginal, which we can get into the weeds about that, but like, would you agree that material conditions for working class people in this country are generally better with democratic governance?
I don't even know if I would. No, I mean, I think like,
really. What about like the average
American city has been under democratic governance for the last like 30 years mostly, and you can see the state of them to get like, what do you mean?
Well, like when we look at like the average standard of living in blue states versus red states, when we talk about like literacy rates, education rates, income, minimum wage, union support, like,
do we think that that's the best that it can be? Do we think that that's like something?
No, of course not.
Like the state of American working class and their material conditions is something that we should be proud of?
No, of course not. I think like, as I mentioned before, I think it's like a baffling, it's enraging that like we make this choice that we are by far the richest country in the history of nations. And too many people are still struggling in this economy. It's still too difficult to buy a home or pay rent. And there's myriad ways that we can improve things, but I just want you to like,
why haven't the Democrats, who have basically had full blue cities, why haven't they been able to achieve those in the?
Well, you wouldn't like my answers, I think, because I'm reading the book Abundance right now. I'm heavily with it.
Okay, tell me your answer.
I think there's like well-intentioned stuff that like rent control, I think, is like a really good example of a policy that's really well-intentioned. Like, you know, the goal is to make housing more affordable. But basically every economist at this point has watched rent control policies play out in cities all over the country, and there's basically a very broad consensus that it has the opposite effect. It ends up raising rents for the surrounding areas. It has a negative impact on the labor market because people, there's less mobility. People don't want to leave that rent control unit, and so they pass up job opportunities, and a couple different other ways that it like negatively impacts. So you can have this like problem, and you can have this really good intention to address the problem, but then it just ends up being bad policy that makes the problem worse. And so I think there's like, it's not like Democrats are perfect when it comes to this stuff, but like generally speaking, would you say that people probably have it more like better off in blue states than red states?
I mean, it depends on what people. I don't think that there's like much value in the generalization like that.
So I can't get you to acknowledge, like, is your position?
If you own a fucking, an oil rig in Louisiana, I'm sure you're doing fine, But like for working class people, I think it's pretty hard everywhere.
Right. So your position is like
I think it's unacceptable everywhere.
Between the two parties, the Republicans and Democrats, you don't think that there is like functionally any difference?
Neither are sufficient. No.
So, for example, like when Donald Trump won in 2016, one of the things that he was able to do was replace 3 Supreme Court justices, which directly led to Roe v. Wade being ended. Would you say that was a worse outcome than if Hillary Clinton would have won?
If Obama had codified Roe v. Wade, or if, like that's such a funny example to bring up too.
I don't think it's funny, and I don't think that I don't know how much about the congressional Democrats that you're aware of in terms of the Congress that Barack Obama was working with, but we had
Obama himself said it was not a priority. Like
He said that because he couldn't get it passed. What happened was he got inaugurated, and
wait.
I'm trying to
think
explain.
that maybe he couldn't get it passed because it wasn't a priority.
No, I think he couldn't get it passed because he didn't have the votes. There were about 4 dozen.
What did he do to pressure people to do those votes? Like, I think it's similar to Joe Biden, right? Like, Joe Biden could have taken, people off of committees. He could have pressured these people. He could
assume you're talking about Manchin, and I think you're talking about Manchin and Sinema. But when we're talking about like Obama, the first thing that he prioritized was passing the stimulus bill, the economic recovery bill, because the global economy was on the verge of a complete meltdown. So that kind of had to take priority like right away. But after that, he focused on sweeping healthcare legislation. And in that debate, which took like a year and a half for them to negotiate that bill, that was a really tough fight to get everybody on the same page. You only get one shot at that. And so when you have a wide tent like the Democratic Party, that's a really difficult process of negotiation. There were about 4 dozen. I'm trying to explain it to you. Hold on real quick. I'm almost done. There were about 4 dozen pro-life Democrats serving in the House at that time that wrote a letter to Obama that said, if you include federal funds for abortions within the ACA, we are not going to vote for this bill. They were pro-life Democrats. There were way more conservative Democrats back then.
In the Senate or in Congress?
In the House. In the Senate, there were like 2 dozen pro-life Democrats. Mm-hmm. The pro-life position was just way more prevalent within like the Democratic Party at that time. Currently, there's 1 pro-life Democrat in the entire Congress. So clearly we've made progress on that issue. But the idea that Obama could have codified Roe but chose not to just isn't true. Like
RBG could have like retired too. There's like many things that could have happened.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there, but do you agree that if Hillary Clinton won and prevented Donald Trump from stacking 6-3 conservative majority Supreme Court, do you agree that it would have been a much better outcome if she would have been able to, if not appoint her own, maybe McConnell would have held that seat open the whole time, but certainly you agree that a 4-4 Supreme Court would be better than a 6-3. That's going to make your job of trying to get legislation down the line just much, much more difficult.
I don't know, man. Again, it's like better for who? Hillary wanted to like
women.
I think
like that want to get abortions.
For American women, yeah, that maybe would have been that. Maybe this hypothetical situation would have been better. Unfortunately,
maybe
she ran a terrible campaign and lost to Donald Trump, so none of that mattered.
Maybe
like, and that also was not the fault of the left. Like that was the fault of the Democrats. They lost that election. They brought the situation where we are in now. Like what?
I would like to build a coalition with you to make sure that never happens again. But I feel like people like you think like if you scratch
your coalition building is really just saying like shut up and like get in line. It's not really like asking for like or advocating for any of the things that you say that we agree on. Because like you said that you agree on the city funding, but like I don't think I've ever heard you like advocate for that, right? Like you say that you know what I mean? Like there's all these things that you're saying that you agree with, but then it's like not a priority for any of your like advocacy.
I talked about it like
you're not even. It's not really you don't want to be in coalition with me. You just want me to vote for like whatever the Democrat Party is, regardless of their actions.
No, I think
regardless of the policy that they're advocating for.
I think that you and me and liberals and leftists, if we formed a coalition, we would have more leverage to pressure Democratic politicians left on the issues where we do agree on. You guys seem to have this philosophy of like you get your power and your leverage through withholding your vote. I think it's the opposite. I think you're in a much
That's not even true either. Like there are very few leftists who were advocating for withholding your vote, and also they were people who were actively doing the hard work of like engaging with the party through Hillary's or through Kamala's entire campaign. Like the uncommitted campaign was begging for meetings. They were begging for space to show their advocacy and to prove to them why they should adopt a better position on this topic.
Do you think I don't want to get into Gaza, man. It's such a minefield. I really don't.
I mean, don't get into Gaza, but take this as an example of a place where voters to the left of you were trying to pressure the administration on a very unpopular position that they were holding, and were shut out.
I'm saying I don't think that it is a productive way to exercise leverage, like withholding your vote and empowering the Republican Party to get into power. I think what ends up
holding votes. I'm talking about the direct advocate. Like what else do we do? What else is there? How would we reach a Democratic candidate like that?
I think that you have a much better chance of reaching a Democratic politician than obviously if someone like a Republican wins in your district or in your state or the presidency. So like Joe Biden is
what is your evidence of that?
Joe Biden is a really good example of this. So like Joe Biden ran kind of like as a moderate guy in 2020. And then by the time he was inaugurated, he invited Bernie's team and Elizabeth Warren's team into the room when they were like crafting these pieces of legislation. And of course, we didn't get everything that we wanted. We didn't get the $15 an hour minimum wage. The dollar amounts were much, much lower than we originally went for. But he went well beyond what he campaigned on in 2020. He actually surprisingly went way more progressive than people thought. Like the student debt thing was like a really good example of this. When he was running in 2020, he was telling people, I don't want to do student debt forgiveness through executive order. I want a bill from Congress. And he gets elected, and the Warren wing of the party convinced him to pursue it with executive authority. And of course, we didn't get that blanket forgiveness because the Supreme Court shut it down, but he forgave 10% of all student loan debt for 5 million people. You can't tell me that those people's lives were not better because Joe Biden won that election. They got a letter saying
it should happen. There should have been more. They should have done more to pressure Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. They should have these people should have been absolutely totally shut out of the party until they get in line. Like, I think there needs to be a lot more discipline in the party structure, especially with very, very minimal improvements. And until that happens, I think that the Republicans are going to continue to win.
I think, unfortunately, in the case of Joe Manchin, he just had a ton of power in that spot. And Biden did not have a lot of leverage over him. Can I get your idea for how do you force Joe Manchin to, sign on for
take him off of the Energy Committee?
What if at that point he turns around and says, you know what? I'm switching my party to,
as he did.
He did that after the fact, but he still, no.
Okay, so you had this horrible person on the Energy Committee. He stood in your way, and then he still did the thing you're threatening us with. Like, do you understand
after the fact? But I'm saying he could have single-handedly took away the Democrats' majority in the Senate, and then you don't get any judges, you get no legislation, you get nothing. This is my problem with a lot of. This is my problem with a lot of you guys. Is you think that
the thing is that if you think that's sufficient, then you don't understand why people voted for Trump.
It's not about it being sufficient. It's about it being efficient. What is the most that you can get in any given situation? Try to do that. That's my philosophy. You seem to have the philosophy of, if it doesn't go as far as I personally want to see it go, and nuke the whole thing, who cares, and let Republicans win.
That's not even my position. That was obviously the voters' position, because they voted for Donald Trump, and they rejected.
That's not your position?
Rejected.
That's not your position.
The Biden administration. They did not like that shit. Yeah. They didn't feel it improved their lives at all. That's the voters decided. They showed that very, very clear.
Yeah, I think unfortunately the world saw inflation, and every single incumbent party all over the country. This isn't to minimize the Democratic Party's shortcomings, because there are many, but it is just simply the case that typically if there's some kind of economic downturn, voters will blame the incumbent party. It's just really hard for them to not be punished. So we saw incumbents losing all over the fucking world. It is what it is on that front. But this idea that Joe Biden didn't do things to materially improve people's lives, I think is just so short-sighted and myopic. This idea that
I think, have you ever read that tweet that's like, Democrats, like throwing a penny at like a homeless person and being like, why didn't you vote for me? I f***ing helped you.
I think
Like, that's what it feels like, is like we exist in a society in which everything is rigged towards the capitalist class, towards the ultra wealthy. And so like you coming like the Kamala Harris like administration coming and saying, no, this is exactly what you get and you're gonna like it and you should be happy about it, was it like really distasteful for most American voters?
you think 5 million people getting emails that their student debt was forgiven was pennies?
Okay, 5 million people did not make a difference in the it did not make a difference in the election.
But that's
like, yeah.
but that's like nothing to you, that 5 million people.
Yes, compared to the student debt crisis in America, yes, that is very, very little. Compared to the state of the working class, like not even just the student debt crisis is one aspect of a incredibly punishing 2 decades for the American working class, where we've become more productive and our wages have stayed the same. We like, I don't, I feel like there's a denial of the reality of like what it is to be working class in America that the Democrats they're stuck inside of, and there's a material reason why. It's because they like immediately Kamala got the nomination and went into backroom deals with like the Uber CEO, right? And then all of her policy was materialized from those meetings. Like there's a direct line between the richest, most powerful people in the country and the Democratic Party, to the point where they will not advocate for things that threaten to the capitalist class and benefit the working class.
I mean, we just have just a fundamental interpretation of like the impact of these policies. You know, when I look at the ARP and the good that did.
Here, can I get some water?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I want to honestly move away from like electoralism. I think it's very clear that you're very like your strategy is electoralism. This is like a very small aspect of my strategy. So I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
It's more of like a statement, and I just want to say, like, see where you're at with it. In some cases, political violence, not by the state, is just.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. I'm glad you acknowledge that.
I think we probably differ greatly in terms of like what kind of violence we're talking about here. But yeah, of course, if there's some corrupt system or if there's some tyrannical system, then you know, what do you think this country like? That's what it is to be an American. You know, we were born from violence. So yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So I guess I kind of go back to that same question of like, where is your line? Like, how far would it have to go? At what point?
Is it okay if I tell you I don't know? I mean, like, we all like to think that we all like to think that we're brave enough to take on, you know, profoundly powerful like institutions and systems of power or whatever. But maybe I'm a fucking coward. I don't know. But like,
I think you're still thinking of it as like individual action. Like, I think that's a big distinction that I would want to always make is like, I always like this. You know, I think we should denounce like individual actors and like people going out. Like, I don't think we can assassinate our way out of this moment right now. I think it needs to be collective, and I think we need to like if I tell my chat all the time, we need to be building that power now and organizing, right? And so I kind of wonder, like, outside of electoralism, outside of voting, outside of the institutions that we maybe disagree on their utility and their ability to stop this moment, but outside of those things, how are we building power that can actually like protect us in a moment where fascism happens? You know, like, I don't know what you think about Hassan being detained and stuff, but as we had a Democratic congressperson charged with a felony today, you know, like these detainments are happening. It's kind of getting close to people like us. And I wonder if you think there's like a distinction between like somebody like yourself and somebody like me. And if if you really want to live in the world where like a bad clip of yours could put you in a cage somewhere, you know?
No, I mean, like, so like Hassan, assuming that everything he said was true, I know there's some hubbub about the timeline, but assuming that a CBP officer was asking him if he supported Donald Trump, that's crazy and obviously super scary. And I wouldn't like relish in that happening because I don't agree with his politics. But like, if you want to do stuff that you think that like, if you want to prepare for the potential like of violence or whatever, if you want to start learning martial arts or firearm training or whatever, then that's fine or whatever. But I think like, I would like to avoid that violence. And like the obvious difference between you and I is I think that we can pursue reforms through electoral processes, and that would be the better alternative to a violent revolution. Because if I imagine a kinetic, hot civil war in this country with like disparate,
yeah, it would be horrifying.
It would be a nightmare, and I would really love to avoid that. And so that's why I choose to.
It would be horrifying. I wonder, like, why aren't you working on it now? I guess
working on violence or reform.
Are you involved in like local political like movement building or like in anything in that way?
No, my focus has been on national politics. I don't really get involved. I know, like, I understand the value of that, but no, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we shouldn't, like, I think whatever kind of local engagement you want to involve in, I think is great and fine. But I think if we let the federal government fall into the hands of the Republicans to the degree that I think your solution would allow for, like a true supermajority, then I think
you would, even if that happened, you would still be saying the same thing with like a new goalpost that is like beyond the pale.
No, I hope to.
You know what I said? You know what I mean? Like, we are in that moment right now.
I sure hope not. But like,
I understand that it will get better, but I think it will get worse. But we're on the path to getting worse, and there's like what institution is going to stop them? Like,
well, right now, you know, we have the Congress and the court still. It's true that he's ignored the Supreme Court on a couple of cases regarding the renditions or whatever, but he's also, you know, abiding several other of their opinions. And right now, the Congress, like, hey, man, it sucks that the Republicans are in control of Congress, but they can only pass a bill through reconciliation right now. So that really greatly limits what they can do. If we give them 60 votes, then they can straight up ban abortion through legislation, or then they can ban porn, or they can enshrine, you know, like Christian dogma into our like educational systems all over the country, like they're doing at a state level right now in like Oklahoma. And so I would like to avoid giving them that power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it would be much worse if they had a supermajority. I just like, okay. I
want to avoid that too. I think you have faith in a way that I don't think is warranted in the Democratic Party to do that. I don't think I've seen anything that outside of just like sit and wait, as Schumer was saying, you know, like I don't think that I've seen anything that has earned their vote or any kind of like rhetoric that has like changed the way that the American people, like the dynamics of why Trump was elected are exactly the same.
Well, it's just not about like party allegiance. It's just about outcomes. So it's, to me, I just get kind of like a Borg with, or like Spock, whatever he is. Like, I just think about like, what would be the better outcome in this spot? And for me, when I look at the prospect of a Republican supermajority in Congress, it's just so obvious that that's like a million times worse, literally a million times worse, if we were to allow that to happen. And so like now
Republicans are worse. I don't think any of this, I don't think that's that like,
no, but like
I just don't think that's
a million times worse. And I think the struggle and the disagreement, the big disagreement,
a million times worse.
It's like, actually so much worse. It's not like this marginal bullshit that you guys like to classify it as. It is considerably worse.
If you're raising your voice to like, you know, fight against Palestine, I think it's pretty marginal. Like it was Joe Biden's administration that was looking deeply into the like ability to deny people student visas based on their speech. Like the Donald Trump campaign essentially took that and just like walked with it, you know, like they took that policy directly from them.
If you
can show you interviews of people in Biden's administration of them saying, I support them doing this.
The Gaza situation is, I think, will be the biggest blemish on Joe Biden's record. If not that, then him choosing to stay in the race as long as he did and basically like tanking the election for Democrats. It's like one of those two things. But if are you really going to sit here and tell me that the current situation with Donald Trump is not worse?
I don't think you have any. I don't think there's any evidence you could point to that would tell me that it's any different at all than what we would see under Biden or Kamala.
Really?
What evidence would you point to of that?
Did Joe Biden propose permanently ethnically cleansing every Palestinian from Gaza?
Yes, the Israeli administration has been saying this from the beginning, and Joe Biden facilitated this happening up until this point.
That's a lie. The idea that Joe Biden...
Not a lie. They said it from the very beginning.
The Biden administration was pressuring Israel to take action for humanitarian aid into the country for the entire time. They are the reason why.
What did that result in, Hutch?
Humanitarian aid getting into the region and feeding people. That's pretty important.
People were starving under Biden too, Hutch.
The idea that you're not wrong to say that like not enough aid got into the country, but aid did go into Gaza. And it was because the Biden administration pressured Israel to allow it into the country. Donald Trump is president now. He doesn't see a need to pressure them. And now 80% of Gaza that relies on humanitarian aid, I'm fine calling it a genocide at this point. That is worse than what happened before. Or like the Rafah.
You don't think it was a genocide under Biden, but you do think it is now.
I don't want to get into this, bro.
Wait, I'm happy you got here eventually, but I feel like there's like you're hiding behind like the politicians,
No, I don't think I'm hiding. It's the policy.
I don't think there is a significant difference. I think if the Israeli government wanted to openly say that they were doing the ethnic cleansing and to annex it, which again, I would argue they did.
Biden pushed back against that.
Kamala defended it.
Come on, bro. Kamala's official stated policy was support for a two-state solution. She never, ever.
There is no way a two-state solution is viable.
That's a separate conversation. I don't want to get in the weeds about that.
Because if you're saying that's your solution and everybody who knows anything about it knows it's not viable, then that's obviously not your position.
You just said that Kamala would have gone along with Israel's plan to permanently ethnically cleanse Gaza.
I literally don't think you have any evidence to the contrary, is what I'm saying.
Her stated...
I would love to see it. I followed the election very closely. I didn't see any reason that there would be like...
You're telling me
different.
You're telling me that Kamala...
her own rhetoric around the issue. She said that she wanted to have the most lethal military.
Who cares?
Like that's
who cares?
What does that mean?
What do you mean? What do you mean?
She wants to kill people with our military. Like that's the policy she was advocating for.
Do you think Kamala wanted to use the American military to kill Palestinians?
I mean, who else would they be killing?
You're telling me right now that you think Kamala Harris would have been inaugurated, and then shortly after being inaugurated, you think that Kamala Harris would have said, you know what, I would like to kick Palestinians out of Gaza permanently and do real estate development, have it be in American territory. You think she would have said that?
Hutch, they are literally doing ethnic cleansing in the West Bank the entire time under Obama.
Wait, why are you dodging that question?
Biden, nobody has stood in their way at all.
Why are you dodging that question?
I'm not dodging that question. Yes, I do. Of course, yes.
You think she would have said that?
I think she would definitely back the ethnic cleansing of Palestine 100%.
Okay, so you think that she
might be different. She might couch it in some hemming and hawing and pearl clutching and wringing of the hands, but the result I don't think for Palestinians would be much different.
Yeah, I think you have to take that position, because if you were to acknowledge how absurdly worse Donald Trump surprised all of us, because really nobody thought he was going to say let's annex Gaza and have it just be an American real estate project. He never even talked. He just came up with that idea one day and all of a sudden said that. And that was just 10,000 times worse than anything I expected. So I just find it absurd that you're sitting here at this point and you still won't recognize that Biden's Gaza Israel policy was horrible, but Donald Trump is so much worse. It's so much worse, bro.
I think it's the exact same. I think they are literally they would have done the exact same. I don't think there's any reason to believe that Kamala would have stepped in. There was no red lines for the Biden administration. Like they pushed them. The Biden administration talked about like relocating the Palestinians from the very beginning.
Relocating them to avoid
right here.
Relocating them temporarily into a corridor in Egypt, or moving them out of Rafah before Israel
would have been. You think that temporary? You believe that temporary line? You believe that line? Like, you think they would have that Israel would have let them in? Suddenly, Israel would have adopted right of return and allowed them back in against their entire history of displacing people and not allowing them to be back in.
The Biden administration, for example, when there was that major offensive into Rafah that Israel proposed, they said that like
said was a red line.
We got all of the Hamas people.
Anyway.
Are you aware of like what happened before Israel did that military offensive into Rafah? Do you have any idea what happened?
What, enlighten me.
The Biden administration pressured Israel to allow the Palestinian civilians, which was like 1.2 million packed into that tiny area. The original plan was for Israel to carry out that military operation with all those civilians still in that infrastructure, in that civilian area. And initially, Israel resisted it, but yes, they allowed. They allowed the mass exodus of like 1 million Palestinians out of that
you're talking about
region before they did the
displacement as if it's a favor to the people it's happening to.
Would it have been better to like keep them there?
Oh my God, bro.
No, seriously, would it
genocide? Actually, that's my stance.
I'm trying to give you an example of.
No, but you're literally saying a mass displacement is better than what mass genocide? Like, yeah, okay, they're both elements of genocide. Like, what are we doing here?
Yes, evacuating people out of a dense.
Let's not forget that this is all done in the name of ethno-nationalism. Like we are talking about an ethno-nationalist state that exists for like there is only one result of ethno-nationalism. It's ethnic cleansing. You have to if you have a demographic definition built into your country, then yeah, you're gonna have to ethnically cleanse the population that's there in order to maintain that demographic definition.
I think Biden's Israel policy was shameful. I think it is. I think he was way too cozy with Netanyahu, way too lenient. He didn't exert enough influence, and I think that is a shameful event, that a shameful part of his track record. However, I do think that Kamala Harris would not have been nearly as bad as Donald Trump, who is going well. There are no let's not forget that Donald Trump is, you could argue he is like the fucking.
It's a difference without like I don't think there's any like point to that.
80% of Gaza relies on humanitarian aid, and because the Biden administration successfully pressured Israel to allow aid into the region. Aid got into the region
before Trump took office, man.
You are not recognizing the impact of allowing humanitarian aid into the region.
If it wasn't for Joe Biden, like
literally, yes,
really fucking genocidal. And I'm telling you, it was a genocide because of Joe Biden. They were giving them the bombs that were dropped on fucking hospitals.
Shortly after October 7th, when Israel began their military operation in Gaza, the Biden administration went to Israel and they asked them, what's your plan for humanitarian aid for civilians? And Israel's response in the beginning was, what do you mean? We're not going to let aid into the country. Are you crazy? And the Biden administration told them, said, this is not an option. If you want our support, you need to make efforts to allow aid into the region. And it's true that there were times
that's ridiculous. What are you saying? We will facilitate your genocide if you let them eat a little bit. Like, what are you talking about?
Are you saying no humanitarian? Are you saying
feet because of this?
Are you saying no humanitarian aid is like no better or no worse?
No humanitarian aid. That's exactly what
you're minimizing. You're minimizing it though. I just told you that the reason why humanitarian
is sending them the bombs dropped on their heads. What are you talking about?
You are missing.
What are you I'm minimizing it?
Yes, you are. You're minimizing
it.
You're minimizing the impact of allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza. You're saying like, who cares? They were dropping bombs. That's what you're saying. Yes. And I think that's
okay, you're right. We should really thank Joe Biden that whenever those babies were at least they had a full belly. That's like really, really great. You know, thank you, Joe Biden. I know you sent the bombs, but at least they had some food before they died. You know,
I think that's an interesting way to summarize my point. That's not my point. My point was that
what you just did to me, though. You were like I'm sitting here saying that no genocide is acceptable. That supporting an ethno-nationalist state is wrong on principle. We should be opposed to ethno-nationalism on principle. Okay, that we should be opposed to that on principle. But any like liberal democracy should oppose this on principle. And it's like you're saying that Joe Biden is actually good because he allowed aid in.
That's not what I said.
By the way, Donald Trump has been pressuring the Israeli government to allow aid in too. Like they've been literally that must be a new development. 3 days of news coming out of Israel.
Must be a new development.
It's brand new, but like it doesn't make a difference. The result is genocide, man.
They've been blocking aid for weeks now. For weeks, and I guess you're.
If people in Gaza don't get food in the next 24 hours or 48 hours, 14,000 babies are going to die from starvation.
It's a fucking catastrophe. Yeah.
Right.
So I would prefer
the Joe Biden administration like supported that 100% until they left office, and then they handed all of that over directly to Trump.
What do you mean they supported starving kids? Like I just told you, they are the reason why Israel allowed aid into the country in the first place. And when Donald Trump won, clearly Israel thought that they didn't have to worry about the same pressure. And so that's what they did. They stopped aid going into that country. And we are now on the precipice of a real catastrophe because they just blocked that aid.
Do you understand how people find like you kind of like distasteful when you talk about this?
The point I'm making is like I think
I know you see like the hate and stuff on Twitter and stuff, but like, do you understand why people feel that way?
I think that people have a very absolutist view of the world, and they think that
against genocide, people are absolutely against genocide.
It's not that. It's about outcomes. I'm talking about outcomes, measuring this outcome versus that outcome. And sometimes that's a difference between
the genocide was unavoidable. There was no option that
who is saying that? So sometimes that means you have a choice between a good outcome and a bad outcome. And sometimes it means you have a choice between a bad outcome and a worse outcome. And I think in either of those cases, you need to make a choice and choose the better outcome, even if it's a bad outcome. You think that you can just...
I would have loved to make a better choice. I genuinely listened. I waited. I was praying. I advocated. I protested Biden. I was waiting for them to change and make that a better like choice that we could have made. Unfortunately, the decision of the campaign was to double down on most lethal military, having Liz Cheney come out and making it very clear that they were going to continue American imperialism.
Would you rather have a...
They made that very clear. They went to great lengths to make sure that everybody understood that they were going to continue American imperialism, continue the things that we were standing against.
Would you rather America have no military, just out of curiosity?
What the is this question, dude?
You're complaining that she said we want a more lethal military. So what is your preference?
Oh my God! Do you think that that's like a good a thing that America should be proud of? Like American foreign policy and imperialism is something that we should be like actively defending.
I don't think we should be like invading
the world is something that we should be like really like
I don't think we should be
super behind and proud of that.
I don't think we should be invading countries, if that's what you mean. But I don't mind that we have a powerful military. No.
So you disagree with what the military does, but you still think like the military is...
It's a case by case. So like I disagree with like the second...
the military does.
Well, the military does a lot of things. It's a pretty complex situation. We have bases all over the world. Like it's not like we're doing just one thing.
And you think that's a good thing?
Sure. Why not?
Why not?
Like, should I be upset that that the U.S. military has a base in Germany? Like, are we doing imperialism there?
I mean, yeah, kind of. for sure.
So what?
And
If,
there are,
to what?
there are
If,
also a lot more places other than that
Okay.
we should, that we have.
should I be upset that we have like a base in like Somalia?
Yes,
Why?
because how does Somalia affect the safety of American civilians?
We cooperate with the
What
Somali.
is the point of why would we have that there? Can you justify it being there?
We cooperate with the Somali government to help them fight groups like Al Shabaab.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With the collaboration of the IMF, which goes into these countries and ruins their economies, right? Like it offers them incredibly exploitative loans and dictates their economic policy inside of the city, inside of the countries.
I mean, there's a lot of countries all over the world right now that are experiencing some really positive economic growth that's lifting a lot of people out of poverty. I think that's a good thing.
Like which ones?
Africa's doing a lot of like, I can't listen. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert on this, but we have a lot of like good relationships.
You don't have to be an expert. I feel like in general, the thing you're saying is like the U.S. military's presence worldwide is like a net positive, which I think is a wild thing to argue.
Well, I mean, like, if we want to get into the history of the United States military, obviously there's some shitty grades that we can go over, some really horrible things that we've done. But as it stands right now, like, I kind of like the fact that we're not currently invading a country like Iraq. And if we have partnerships, strategic partnerships with countries that want us to have a military presence there.
We are bombing Yemen currently. Like, what do you...
Well, I mean, I can't speak to those like military operations that Trump is going with, but the Houthis are currently engaged in. Listen, it's been really nice talking to you, buddy. I'm very tired. I've been streaming for a really long time.
Okay.
I don't know how far. I just feel like we're kind of treading the same ground here. And so I don't want to.
Fine. I mean, it's okay. Hutch, the one thing I would say to leave you with is like, I think you should try to think about what that line is for you in fascism, and like, and try to think of like what kind of protection you would want, right? Because I actually do think we're in a pretty scary moment, especially with people like making content on the internet and sharing our political thoughts and shit like that, and building power outside of electoralism is really, really important. That's how we're going to protect each other. And so
I similarly want you to think about the fact, like, I would love to team up with you to make sure that Republicans don't get more power. I think that would be so great if people like you and me could build a coalition, a reliable voting bloc to oppose these people, to stop these really bad outcomes from happening. And I would like you to consider that.
By voting blue, right?
We can work together about, like, we can figure out, like, which candidates we want to support, and maybe we can get a progressive over here. Like, I would love to like work all the details out with you.
Okay.
But generally,
I mean, I've been really plugged in. I've been working on like a lot of like, I'm pretty plugged in on LA local politics. So, maybe there's somebody you can have on your stream or something that I can plug you in with.
I do want to say I appreciate the fact that, like, obviously we disagreed, but I like that this conversation didn't devolve into a total shit show. I appreciate you making the effort to be cordial and respectful. And that actually matters. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're not accountable to me, man. That's what it is at the end of the day, If it was a good friend of mine talking like you, I probably would have been a little bit more aggressive, but I know you don't give a what I think, you know what I mean? You're not accountable to me, so I don't think it's like something that I need to be like scolding you about,
Okay, man. Well, it was good talking to you.
Yeah, take care.
God damn it. You know what though? Honestly, as far as these kind of conversations go, that one could have been much worse. So I appreciate that. Okay. I've had conversations that have devolved into complete lunacy, just chaos. I'm going to chalk that up for as a win for not for me, but for like non-crazy political discourse. I'm going to call that a W. Okay. It was respectful. Didn't get crazy. Is what it is.